Hey, welcome back to another video. One that is going to be kind of a long one, as you can probably tell by the time code. Robot duplicates in fiction are pretty common. They're a trope as old as time itself. We've seen it in sci-fi and fantasy, mostly sci-fi because it requires robots, plenty of times, and the Sonic series is no stranger to them as well. Most famously, you probably know Metal Sonic, but there are quite a lot of other robot duplicates throughout the franchise, and I thought it would be fun / informative to people who aren't quite as hardcore into Sonic as like I am, about all of them, and especially some of the weirder ones. So before we get into things, we do need to lay some ground rules so that we're not talking about everything that's even a little bit mechanic in the entire history of the series. First, no piloted robots, so none of the Death Egg robots, no Metal Robotnik from the OVA, none of that. They have to be autonomous, or at least separate beings from somebody else, basically. So they cannot be directly controlled by someone else. Two, they have to be specifically copies of somebody else. They can't just happen to look like them. So Egg Robo from Sonic 3 is a no-go, and the Remote Robot / T-Pup from Tails' Adventure also doesn't count. Those just look like Eggman and Tails, and they're not specifically robotic versions of them. Third, no roboticized characters. They have to be robots that exist separately from the person they're based on. Plus, adding in roboticized characters is going to bloat this to quite a bit, and honestly, roboticized characters can probably be given their own video at some point in the future, just because of how many times it happened, in at least the comics. So, none of that. And lastly, they have to have actually appeared in a thing, no, like, background references that alluded to their existence, but they never actually showed up. They had to have actually been in the media that they're from. So, no Project Metal Snively. Yes, that was a real thing, except not really, because it was just in the background and never actually led to anything. But stuff like that doesn't count. So, with those out of the way, we're also splitting this up into sections between where the copies originate from, whether they're from a game or whatever, just to make it a little more organized rather than just flinging a bunch of robots all over the place from various sources in a random order. And to begin with, we will lead in with the cartoons, because there aren't that many cartoons in general for Sonic, and there are even fewer robot duplicates made as a result of them, so they're easy to get out of the way right off the bat. Pseudo-Sonic is the first one, debuting in the Pseudo-Sonic episode of Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog. And as our first one on here, it's really quite fitting that he's pretty basic. He's just a robot copy of Sonic who existed to frame Sonic for various things. Eventually he got destroyed, Sonic got inflated. Let's not talk about that part and leave it at that. Pseudo-Sonic also existed in the Archie continuity because the early days of the Archie comics just straight up adapted a couple of Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog episodes, and this being one of them, and the plot of that was largely the same. So not much different there. However, he did get to actually appear again way later in the Archie series on the Island of Misfit Robots, or Misfit Badniks, one of those two. So that's double the appearances that cartoon Pseudo-Sonic ever got. Sonic SatAM had Robo-Sally, a robot duplicate who was quite sophisticated compared to Pseudo-Sonic, given that it doesn't even really look like a robot after the process is totally complete. And this one was created to infiltrate the Freedom Fighters, as you could probably guess. It largely managed to actually convince most everybody, except for Tails, who eventually figured out what was wrong, and helped reprogram it to lead an attack to rescue the real Sally. Sallybot never really appeared again outside of that, but that was not the first time there were robot versions of Sally, or at least robot characteristics, because there's roboticized Sallys later that, again, do not belong in this video. Next, from the Sonic Christmas special, there is Robo Santa. No explanation needed there, so we'll move right into Team Cybonic from Sonic Boom. These guys are technically cyborgs, but they exist separate from Team Sonic and are, other than their brains, robots, so I'm counting them. They were created with organic brains to resist the control of Hypnobot, a robot that Tails invented that went rogue, and after they defeated Hypnobot, they were left to guard the town of Roboken, formerly known as Morristown. Later, Dr. Eggman took control of them so that he could have them go against Sonic and his friends in a soccer match. Yeah, Sonic Boom got weird. Eventually, they were able to break Team Cybonic out of Robotnik's control, or Eggman's control, rather, and both of the teams beat the ever-living hell out of him. That is it for the cartoon original copies. Like I said, there really aren't very many, so now we can move into the games, where the large majority of robot versions of characters are, and probably home to all of the ones that people are most familiar with. The very first ever robot duplicate in a Sonic game was Mecha Sonic from the 8-bit version of Sonic 2. Yes, Mecha Sonic. For a really long time, I and a lot of other people called this Silver Sonic, but officially it is Metal Sonic. Not Metal Sonic, it's Mecha Sonic, rather. He actually did later show up in Sonic Mania during the Metal Sonic boss fight under the name Silver Sonic, but the original is Mecha Sonic. The post-reboot Archie comics also feature their own version of this guy, and he's actually a prototype for the comics version of the next robot copy, Mecha Sonic from Sonic 2 on Genesis. Probably remember this guy as being kind of a pain in the ass in Death Egg Zone when you have no rings, and jumping on him sometimes or at the wrong angle will kill you immediately, because Sonic 2's ending was kind of mean. For as pretty minor and forgettable as this Mecha Sonic, also known for a long time as Silver Sonic, was, he's actually shown up in a surprising number of places, including the Shogakukan manga and Sonic the Comic, and even got a cameo in Mario and Sonic at the Tokyo 2020 Olympic Games, because I guess they were just pulling out all the stops for the 8-bit minigame story mode thing for that game. You can also find this Mecha Sonic in Sonic Pocket Adventure's Aero-based zone, largely as a result of that game kind of just being Sonic 2 with some names and elements switched around and using Sonic Adventure character designs. And then also the Archie comics had their fair share of this version of Mecha Sonic, actually calling him Silver Sonic, and there were at least 3 different versions pre-reboot, and then there was the prototype that they used the 8-bit design for, and the one they had in post-reboot, and it got pretty wild. Probably the only really interesting one, though, is Mecha Sonic 2.0, or Silver Sonic 2.0, rather. He actually got reprogrammed to be a protector of Station Square after they adapted Sonic Adventure, and served that role until Shadow destroyed it. Now we have the biggin, Metal Sonic, first appearing in Sonic CD, and continuing to be probably the most popular antagonist in the entire series. And I mean, like, as a character who stayed an antagonist, because if we're talking characters who were introduced, that definitely goes to Shadow. But Metal Sonic, in terms of characters that have debuted and continued to be villains, is probably the most popular and definitely the most recognizable non-Eggman villain in the entire franchise. He's showed up in a crap ton of games ever since he was introduced and been given a few upgrades. Knuckles Chaotix for the 32X turned him into Metal Sonic Kai, which the comics adapted as Titan Metal Sonic and isn't really important enough to go over separately. And Sonic Heroes upgraded him into Neo Metal Sonic, Metal Madness, and Metal Overlord, because that game was all about Metal Sonic, which I was quite happy with, because I've always been quite a fan of Metal Sonic. Not exactly a hot take, but I just like anytime they do stuff with him. For as much as he's appeared, though, he's never really been a big deal outside of Sonic Heroes. He got that one moment to be the big bad and act on his own, but outside of that, he's pretty much just been one of Robotnik's lackeys and a recurring boss in a few of the games. But that is where the Archie comics came in, where not only did they have a crap ton other versions of Metal Sonic, seriously, I could have made this video entirely about Metal Sonics from the Archie comics alone, and probably had a pretty sizable video of its own. But they later actually kind of started giving him a little bit of character, and had Metal Sonic, while largely operating as one of Robotnik's, one of Eggman's robots, sort of went off to do his own thing, and frequently was against Eggman, and it seemed like they were building up to him being properly his own threat separate from Eggman pre-reboot and pre the canceling of the Archie comics, but that never really came to fruition. And also, to add to this Mecha Sonic, Silver Sonic, Metal Sonic weird name confusion thing, when he was originally introduced into the Archie comics, they called him Mecha Sonic, because why the hell not? Just make it more weird. Next we have another Mecha Sonic, but one that people actually know as Mecha Sonic, the boss of Sky Sanctuary Zone himself, this big blue spiky dude. Outside of this game, he's basically had no exposure outside of a few small cameos, and even the Archie comics never really did much with him. He's had small references since Sonic 3, like he was in the, he was on the website, he was mentioned on the website for Sonic 4, but outside of that, not really anything big. The Archie comics did seem like they were planning on using him for something, given that we have this unfinished art of him from issue 291, but that issue was never published because the comics were canceled at issue 290, so we'll never really get to know what they had planned, if anything, really. There's another weird one that is probably a little more recognizable just because of how wild his design is. This is Mecha Sonic model number 29, otherwise known as Rocket Metal. He appears in Sonic the Fighters as part of the game's cutscenes and story mode, but you never actually fight him. For some reason, you just fight regular Metal Sonic. As such, I really don't even know why he exists. Maybe just as part of the attract mode in the arcades to get people to go, whoa, that's a wild Metal Sonic, what's this game like? And then, you know, play Sonic the Fighters. But frankly, I think you should do that anyway. It's a decently fun game. But he never really mattered. He didn't do anything. Incidentally, if you hack him into the game to be playable, and in the character select screen, playable in quotation marks probably, he is called Rocket Metal, which is where that name comes from, despite the fact that he has Mecha Sonic model number 29 plastered on the side of his frickin' head. So he's some weird in-between of a Mecha Sonic and a Metal Sonic. Given that it says Mecha Sonic on the side of his head, I'm going to go with a Mecha Sonic and not count him as a separate or like an upgrade to Metal Sonic, but there's probably decent argument to be made either way, given that Japan tends to use Mecha Sonic and Metal Sonic to kind of mean the same thing. Mecha Sonic was sort of a catch-all for any robotic version of Sonic, hence why we have 3 of them. So that's probably why this happened. Why they went with Rocket Metal, even in the character select though, anybody's guess. Obviously, he never showed up outside of this game, but he did get a brief mention in the Archie comics as part of an off-panel during one of the issues that was in the Champions arc, which itself was inspired by Sonic the Fighters. So that was cute. I actually would like to see them use Rocket Metal at some point in the future, because this is such a weird design, and I would really be curious as to, like, what they would do with it. Would it just be retconned into a power-up for Metal Sonic, or would it be its own separate thing? I don't know. I think it would be cool to find out, though. In the racing game Sonic R, we were actually given 2 brand new robot copies of characters, the first being Metal Knuckles. Sonic R did not really have a story beyond just a very thinly veiled explanation for why there was a racing tournament going on, and as such, Metal Knuckles is basically just a robot who looks like Knuckles, without really any personality. He is, though, apparently the second best character in the game, beaten only by Metal Sonic. Not Metal Sonic, Super Sonic. I know how to talk right now. The Archie series eventually got around to adapting this guy into their continuity as just one of the ways for Eggman to beef up his Dark Egg Legion, and not dissimilarly from the game's version, this Metal Knuckles really never did much of anything. He did feature in the final story arc before the reboot, Endangered Species, but he never showed up post-reboot, probably due to, at that point, Sega really starting to lean into the classic and modern Sonic are separate entities school of thinking that they still do for some stupid reason. Metal Knuckles is also in the IDW comics in the form of the 30th anniversary special, where he played a decently large part. He still doesn't really have much unique to him, other than being one of the rare, like, copies of a character who's not Sonic, but it was nice to see him there, at least. Now, in contrast to how largely unremarkable Metal Knuckles is, the other robot from Sonic R, Tails Doll, is a lot more interesting, if only for how the fans and just generally other people have interpreted him. In the game, Tails Doll is basically just another character, and I don't even think he's particularly good. However, once the internet got a hold of him, they radically changed Tails Doll. People just sort of went with this whole Tails Doll is really creepy thing, and he featured very prominently in a lot of creepypastas for a good while. And as a result, he still kind of has, at least to me anyway, this permanent link towards creepy goings-on. He just looks eerie, and when you look at him, you think of creepy stuff. It seems like the creative team over on the Archie series agreed, because there were a couple of times they referred to him as being creepy, and when they finally introduced Tails Doll into the continuity, not only did he serve as a surveillance drone for Eggman, they gave him the ability to turn into this terrifying nightmare monster. And this persisted through the reboot, by the way. Tails Doll also showed up in the 30th anniversary special, though only serving in that surveillance drone role that it had in the Archie series, and with none of the nightmare stuff. Once the main series hit 3D, we were introduced to the Chow Garden, and eventually Omochao, a robotic version of the cute little Chow dudes. Omochao has actually gone on to become weirdly prolific throughout the series, appearing in just about every game in some capacity, from a tutorial machine, to a racing announcer, to a racing competitor in Team Sonic Racing. So, if you've played a Sonic game basically ever since Sonic Adventure, odds are pretty good that Omochao is in it, even if it is just to explain the difficulty modes, essentially, of Sonic Heroes. The comics also have their own version of Omochao, and interestingly, instead of being a seemingly built robotic Chow, Omochao in this continuity was a regular Chow who became robotic after it spent a lot of time with Sonic's roboticized father, Jules, which is a neat little nod to how Chows actually change in at least Sonic Adventure 2, given how more prominent the Chow Garden is in that game than 1, where they take on the characteristics of the character that raises them. And I think that was a really cool little detail and a good way to bring Omochao in without needing to weirdly try to explain why there's a robotic Chow. So anyway, in the reboot, when they brought in Omochao, they didn't really feel the need to explain why there was a robotic Chow, and there just was. And he served as a general support and sort of video comlink thing for the Freedom Fighters. Not major, but he's there, and did appear in several issues as a result of it. And then also Omochao exists in the IDW series, appearing to just be mass-produced helper droids of some variety. When we got to Sonic Advance on the GBA, we were given yet another copy, and this is the second one of Knuckles, Mecha Knuckles. There really isn't very much to say about Mecha Knuckles. Sonic Advance was not huge on story, it was very much like the Genesis games in that way. So the only really incredibly noteworthy thing about Mecha Knuckles is his bootleg color scheme, and his interesting mix of just plain old gray and compound eyes once he loses the fake skin/fur stuff that really does not get used for robot copies in Sonic ever. So in general, it's a bit more of a generic choice, but for Sonic robots, it's actually quite unique. And about a week ago, that's where that entry would have ended, but just recently, IDW announced they'd be doing a Scrapnik Island miniseries for their comic, featuring the return of Mecha Knuckles. And given that series seems to be all about robots, I fully expect to have to update this video at some point in the future to include a couple new ones, but we'll see. Either way, it's nice but also incredibly weird to see Mecha Knuckles coming back. We've got some literally Who territory from Sonic Advance 2 here. These are Flickies, not to be confused with Flickies. Not confusing at all. These are robotic versions of the cute little animals you're probably used to seeing in the classic games, and probably Sonic Lost World, given how often you had to collect those. As they're just regular enemies appearing in the game and don't have anything to do with the story, there's not really anything noteworthy about them. They're just interesting little curiosities. But I do really like how they have these little spike balls that follow them around like the baby chicks do in the original arcade game where the Flickies come from. That's a cute detail. When the mid-2000s infected everything and Shadow got his own game, we were introduced to the Shadow androids, which gave Shadow a crazy identity crisis, but were created by Dr. Eggman to serve as an incredibly powerful army for him. Technically, these guys are also in Heroes, but they feature most prominently in Shadow, and it's where they're more specifically mentioned. They're basically just at the end of Team Dark's story in Heroes, so it's not that noteworthy. The game's multiplayer mode actually features variants of Shadow androids called Metal Shadow androids that are basically just the same, but they have straight out metallic skin. And also, they're way higher poly than the ones in the game, in the game's story mode, I should say. Surprisingly, these never showed up in the Archie series, at least as far as I could tell, but they do exist in the IDW continuity, where they ended up being a major part of the backstory for Whisper the Wolf, one of the new characters introduced in that book. They killed most of her original team, leaving her horribly traumatized, and is the reason why she doesn't really get super close to people anymore. So, fun times with the Shadow Androids. In the incredibly overlooked Sonic Rivals series, specifically in the second one, we were introduced to Metal Sonic 3.0, a Metal Sonic from Blaze's dimension created by Dr. Eggman Nega, an alternate version of Dr. Eggman also from that dimension. This guy basically just existed to distract the heroes while Eggman Nega summoned the Ifrit, and by the end of the game he was either destroyed or trapped in another dimension. It wasn't terribly clear, and they really didn't do anything with 3.0 ever again. Except in Sonic Speed Simulator, which is a Roblox game where they decided to reintroduce 3.0 for some reason as Mock Metal Sonic, I think they called him. So, weird thing to bring back up, but hey, Minecraft had a frickin' Minecraft had a frickin' Metal Knuckles skin, so who the hell knows what can happen anymore with cross-promotions. Interestingly, when Jazzwares had the license to Sonic figures for a while, they actually pitched a figure of 3.0 to Sega, but it just got shot down. Even though Sega was for some reason alright with not one, but two, or maybe three, clear blue Sonics, and this clear purple invisible SBO. Sega, man. Another literally Who robot, and one that if you forgot existed, I definitely don't blame you given the game that it's from, is Eggbot from Sonic Chronicles. This guy largely just features as the boss of the Hazard Vault in Metropolis, where he was left to rot with a bunch of other Eggman creations. Nothing major story-wise happened with it as far as I am aware. It got destroyed. Eggman was sad, because he thought it was a handsome devil. Here's another strange one. These are the virtual hedgehogs from Sonic Colors. They are canonically robots, meant to exist for the Sonic simulator in the Game Land satellite thing, which is basically just an in-game excuse for a way to have special stages to get the Chaos Emeralds to become supersonic. But they exist, and they're unique. They are visually identical to Sonic, except for their antennas, and for all intents and purposes are perfect copies of him. These guys surprisingly did show up again in Sonic Lost World as part of the multiplayer, unless you played the Steam version where they got rid of the multiplayer, so they're not there. Some more really weird side mode stuff comes from Sonic Boom Fire and Ice, a game that I think a lot of people probably forget about, probably because of the lack of quality Sonic Boom Rise of Lyric had, and just kind of how overlooked Shattered Crystal was. These are the Bot Racers. They are part of the Bot Racing minigame, which, as far as I could tell from looking up, is basically a time trial challenge thing. And these robots exist as facsimiles of the playable characters in the game. They are, well, some of them are based on characters from the game. Others are robots that were actually in Sonic Boom the show, like Burnbot, who doesn't actually burn things. So there you go. There's, as far as I'm aware, no story explanation for why these guys exist. They just do. Next is one that you probably did legitimately forget entirely about, or probably just didn't really put much thought or stock into being a robot copy. It's the Amy doll from Sonic Mania. Yes, this is a thing. It appears in this gashapon of a boss fight, and basically just does what Amy did in Sonic CD, namely run after you and try to hug you. Not really anything interesting there. It shares some basic similarities with Tails doll, though whether it is exactly as nightmare-inducing is as of yet unknown. And then the last one from the games is one that I legitimately forgot about while I was writing the notes for this. This is Guardian from Sonic at the Olympic Games, from a mobile game that I also forgot about entirely, so it's really quite fitting. Guardian apparently borrows his appearance from Shadow Sonic, which is a thing in Mario and Sonic at the Sochi 2014 Winter Olympic Games. Gonna have to just take my word on that. That's what the Sonic Wiki says, and I can't find an image of Shadow Sonic anywhere. So, this thing is just a robot that looks like Sonic that is programmed with the data of the world's greatest athletes. Because, sure, why not? Now that we are out of the games, we move into my favorite area of Sonic media, the comics. And there are a lot of robot copies from the comics, a lot of weird ones, a lot of cool ones. So let's get going, because this is already lasting a while. I'm at 36 minutes of recording time. I don't know how much it'll be once I've cut stuff out, but this is a long video already. Fleetway's Sonic the Comic gave us the first ever robot version of a Sonic character to exist in a comic with Badnik Sonic. Not to be confused with Metal Sonic, this is a separate thing. It is kind of nightmare-inducing, if I'm quite honest with you. It was created to destroy star posts to keep Robotnik's base in the Special Zone a secret, and in turn, shift the blame onto Sonic. When Sonic encountered Badnik Sonic, he actually got pulled inside of the robot and turned into an organic battery, much like how regular Badniks use Flickies as a power source. But somehow, like legitimately somehow, I have no idea how this was supposed to work, that allowed Sonic to gain control of Badnik Sonic, and he was able to use that to stop whatever Eggman's plan was in that story. I legitimately don't remember. It's been a while since I've read it, and it's not that pertinent to this. That was the last, really, we ever saw of Badnik Sonic. Way later down the line, we did see an upgraded version of Badnik Sonic in the background, but it never actually got put to use, so yeah. That very same story also gave us these two, Badnik Ruff and Badnik Stripes, who are Badnik versions of, obviously, Ruff and Stripes, two animal characters who, as far as I can tell, never appeared in the comic after this issue. There's nothing really that noteworthy about Badnik Ruff and Stripes. They exist, their designs are kind of weird, and they pad out the ranks to this video, I guess. So there's that. They're a fun trivia point to bring up later. There you go, that's why they exist. Obviously, Fleetway could not go without doing their own version of Metal Sonic, which they named Metallics. While the initial Metallics shared a lot in common with the game's version, as the stories went on, they actually did some pretty unique stuff with them, eventually creating the Brotherhood of Metallics, an entire faction of Metal Sonics who are a not-so-thinly veiled pastiche of the Daleks off Doctor Who. And I'm not even, just making that comparison. According to Nigel Kitching, the writer for a large majority of Sonic the Comic, while initially he didn't really intend for any similarities to the Daleks, once he sort of noticed them, he leaned into it, and that is kind of where the Brotherhood of Metallics came from. Even having a giant Emperor Metallics, who was a notably different color scheme, which was also a thing that Doctor Who had done around the same time. Well, I say around the same time, Doctor Who had been off the air for years, so. These guys were actually recurring antagonists for a very, very long time, but were eventually defeated very anticlimactically, quite literally by the push of a button. It was a pretty lame ending for what I thought was the best part of the series. The metallic stuff in Sonic the Comic is legitimately amazing, and is kind of worth sifting through all the stupid shit that series does. But yeah, they got destroyed in a very lame way, and it was, I think, a bad way to end off one of your best and most recurring villain factions. Another complete rando from the Fleetway series is the Practice Robot. This thing basically just showed up in one issue, sort of as a fake out to the audience, and also in-universe as a way to train Metallics prior to its proper debut in issue 25. This next one is maybe cheating a little bit, but frankly, this is my video, and I'm gonna do this way. The Auto-Automatons are a general concept in the Archie comics that are essentially the equivalent to Marvel's life model decoys. They are exact robotic duplicates of somebody meant to replace them or stand in for them in any other circumstance. And because they're all basically the same thing, I'm just lumping them all into this one section rather than having an individual entry for every single Auto-Automaton. Partially because I think that would just be really tedious, and also because, frankly, I really don't want to have to dig through and find every Auto-Automaton that may or may not have existed. There have been Auto-Automatons of a whole bunch of characters. The very first one was of Sally, but the probably most important one was Auto Fiona, a robot version of a younger Fiona Fox, who Tails fell in love with. That did not pan out once he eventually found out that she was a robot sent by Eggman, and she was rusted by the end of that story. But that ended up playing into Tails' character way later down the line when the real Fiona Fox showed up, and he still harbored some feelings for her, something that really did not turn out well for him, or Sonic for that matter, in multiple ways. Moving a little bit back into Fleetway, we have Porker Metallics, a Metallics-created copy of regular supporting character Porker Lewis. Yes, that was really his name. The Metallics created this version of Porker to try and deceive and destroy Sonic, but he was eventually found out, and the Chaotix helped destroy him. Again, not really much interesting went on with him, but he does have this pretty unique, almost Terminator-style look once he's revealed, of sort of some of the organic bits still being there and the metal. So there's that. And because the Fleetway series just absolutely would not stop with robots for a little while, we also got Badnik Amy and Johnny Lightfoot, Badnik versions of Amy and Johnny Lightfoot. In a similar vein to Badnik Sonic, these guys were using the real Amy and Johnny as batteries, and that didn't really last very long. They were destroyed incredibly quickly. Basically, the only thing interesting about them is Badnik Amy's Bane mask. Why did she look like that? But hell, it's a unique design if nothing else. Long after the defeat of the Metallics, they introduced one final Metallics in the form of Knuckles Metallics. Metallics. Unlike the very interesting and cool Brotherhood of Metallics, Knuckles Metallics was lame and was completely subservient to Robotnik, largely not doing anything at all. He appeared and fought Sonic in an arena match before losing, later reappeared to kidnap Sonic, and those were the two only really major things that he ever did. There was a panel in the background of one issue showing more Knuckles Metallics being built, but those never got used, and Knuckles Metallics basically just continued to exist as an interesting footnote, which is a real shame. Because I remember when they were building up to it while I was reading through the comic, I was super interested. I was like, okay, a new Metallics thing. Metallics was cool, and a Knuckles one is neat. And then when it happened, it was just kind of boring and could have been any other random robot. But again, we got a cool design out of it, so at least there's that, if nothing else. Deep in the far reaches of the Archie Sonic multiverse, we have this goober, the Kentopolis Robot Sonic. Yeah, take a real good look at this guy. This absolute weirdo was a giant robot created in Sonic's image by Dr. J. Kintobor as thanks for Sonic saving his version of Mobius from a bunch of giant monsters, who are actually a bunch of Godzilla-fied versions of Freedom Fighter characters. Kintobor planned to name this robot after Sonic, but Sonic the Zone Cop yoinked Sonic out of that dimension before he could actually give Kintobor his name, so in continuity it is just unnamed, and out of continuity we're left with the unwieldy Kentopolis Robot Sonic. Also, he's powered by half a Chaos Emerald. Among the bevy of Metal Sonics that exist in the Archie Sonic comics, none are more immediately unique and noteworthy than Shard the Metal Sonic. Yes, that is his full name. Yes, it's kind of dumb, but bear with me here. Shard is actually the very original Metal Sonic, the one that appeared in Sonic the Hedgehog number 25, who later reappeared in issue 89, I think? Rebuilt into this sleek, interesting new form to get revenge on Sonic, but by the end of that story had a change of heart. Not dissimilar to how Metal Sonic ended up in the Sonic OVA. He was seemingly destroyed in that issue, but he actually appeared way later down the line, repaired and repainted into this sick Metal Sonic 3.0 color scheme, and joined the Secret Freedom Fighters, who were kind of like a Black Ops, just separate division of the regular Freedom Fighters to handle more dangerous missions. Shard never really got any huge presence, but he was kind of a fan favorite, and so it was kind of a shame when he got erased from existence when the reboot occurred, and post-reboot his personality was transplanted onto Gemerald, because, I mean, what else are we going to use Gemerald for? During a brief period of time where Sonic was assumed dead, but in reality had been launched into space, Mobius was in need of a protector to serve in his place, which led to Sonic's Uncle Chuck and Roto the Walrus devising the Metal Sonic Troopers. These guys ultimately ended up not actually being needed because Sonic returned from space, so they were put into storage, where they were way later reactivated by Adam, a sort of sentient computer virus that Eggman took a liking to and actually considered his son. Adam didn't really share that same affection, and awakened them to try to destroy Eggman. So you can guess about how nice of a guy Adam was. Even like this, though, they didn't really do much, and they were eventually destroyed. It just kind of seemed like these were introduced as a way to get some use out of the Neo Metal Sonic design from Sonic Heroes, which, you know, noble goal. That is a pretty sick design, and it's nice to see it get at least some use, even if it is in this pretty minor role. Outside of the main general continuity of the Archie comics, we had the Sonic X comics, which probably deserve a video of their own just because of how wild they could get. But our main focus for them here is because they had a robot of their own, Rogue Rouge, the only robot copy of Rouge to ever exist. Rogue Rouge was obviously a robot duplicate of Rouge, who was designed to steal gems for Eggman. She stole Chaos Emerald, if I recall correctly, and the Moon Emerald, a thing that probably needs some explanation, but never got any, before eventually being destroyed by Rouge when she ripped its fucking head off, and Topaz looked kind of into it. I guess she likes the robot bloodlust. Since Sonic had so many frickin' robot copies of himself, it really only stands to reason that the evil Sonic from Anti-Mobius, otherwise known as Scourge, eventually got his own in the form of Metal Scourge. Metal Scourge is, in continuity, literally a repaint of Metal Sonic, who existed for about 10 seconds before being destroyed by Scourge's Suppression Squad. It's a sick design that really didn't get much use, and probably the most important thing that Metal Scourge ever did was being used for spare parts to repair Shard way later down the line. Continuing on with characters other than Sonic getting robot duplicates, we have Team Metal, or more specifically 2/3 of it, Metal Tails and Metal Amy. Like many things, Team Metal was dispatched to attack the Freedom Fighters and their home of New Megaopolis, and they actually proved to be a pretty big threat given that Metal Sonic on his own is already a lot to handle, and Metal Tails and Metal Amy are more of that. It eventually took the secret Freedom Fighters showing up to help destroy them. I've always kind of really liked Metal Tails and Metal Amy, and I was really disappointed they didn't really ever show up again. Metal Amy in particular, because she just kind of rockets around all over the place. She doesn't have legs, which is a unique take given that robot versions of characters tend to more or less look exactly like them, so I thought this was a interesting little design change, but again, they never really showed up again. Metal Tails did at least get to have 2 appearances to his name, first appearing at the end of an issue of Sonic Universe before his introduction in the mainline Sonic the Hedgehog book. If you have ever wondered if there was ever a pirate version of Metal Sonic, then rejoice, for your incredibly specific question has been answered, and the answer is yes. This is Captain Metal, and buckle in, because things are gonna get really weird. Captain Metal started off as Metal Sonic 3.3, who was dragged through a couple of dimensions by Shadow before landing in Blaze's dimension and getting blowed up real good by Marine. Once the Super Genesis wave rewrote the Archie Sonic multiverse, the Soul Dimension actually remained largely untouched, with most of its stuff being brought over through the reboot, including Metal Sonic 3.3. What was left of him was eventually found by Doc Ratcheturn, who rebuilt and restored him, basically, and Metal Sonic thanked him for this by maybe killing him and stealing his boat. Later, Metal Sonic ran into Boltbeard the Pirate, whom he promptly did actually kill, and used his parts to upgrade himself into Captain Metal, and he commandeered Boltbeard's ship. Under the name Captain Metal, he ran afoul of Blaze and Captain Whisker, and eventually upgraded himself into a crab, but ultimately he was still destroyed by Burning Blaze, and sank to the bottom of the ocean, swearing revenge, which never came. And yes, he did speak like a pirate. The final comic-exclusive robot, finally, to go over is War Walrus. Yes, that is really his name. There is not much to say about this guy, unfortunately, despite that amazing name. He's a robot version of Rotor, who existed for about 10 seconds and got destroyed. You could maybe make an argument for this not really counting because he's not called Metal Rotor or something, but this is a case where the likeness is so exact, I feel like I kind of have to count it. Plus, I mean, come on. You kind of got to be glad that I let you know there's a character called War Walrus. And then, to wind things down after the big tears, we have what I've named in my notes as Literally Who, a bunch of catch-alls that don't really fit into any other of the categories here, and that don't really have enough to warrant their own thing. So, quick little lightning round. Let's finish this up. I've been here almost an hour. First, there is Zonic, not to be confused with Sonic the Zone Cop from the Archie series. This Sonic is an evil robot duplicate of Sonic, introduced in the Sonic the Hedgehog adventure game books, which were a series of choose-your-own-adventure books released in the 90s. The info on these things is pretty scarce, so I don't really know anything about the plot, or what Sonic was like, if he even really had a personality beyond just being an evil robot. But there you go, there's this lumpy jackass. And then also, from the adventure game books, we have Robo-Sonic, all as one word, not to be confused with Robo-Sonic from the Shogakukan manga, who was kind of their version of Mecha Sonic a little bit, or Robo-Sonic, the name that Sonic 2 Mecha Sonic got in LEGO Dimensions, so he was not confused with Sonic 3 Mecha Sonic, who was also in that game. This Robo-Sonic is actually a friendly large boy who Sonic teamed up with to help defeat a robot called Tyrannobot. I had to double check that was really his name, because man, that sounds kind of amazing. Again, there's like no real info on the adventure game books outside of their existence, and frankly, I am amazed that the Sonic Wiki even documents their existence enough for me to be able to mention these two, so there's a couple more randos for you. And the final robot to talk about, finally, is Future Sonic, who appeared in Sonic Tales of Deception, which was kind of like a storybook thing aimed at younger readers. This guy masqueraded as a future version of Sonic as a way to get close to Sonic and his friends, and eventually managed to get Sonic out of the way so Robotnik could attack a nearby town successfully. As you could guess, this didn't really work out, and Future Sonic met his end when Sonic ran him over with a tank. So, there you go. That is, at least as far as I can tell anyway, every major robot copy introduced throughout the Sonic comics and the games and the cartoons and the choose-your-own-adventure books. If there's one I didn't talk about here, it's either because it's so obscure that even the Sonic Wiki doesn't have an entry for it, or it was just another incarnation, basically, of a version that existed, of a robot that already existed in like a game or something. Like, I didn't talk about every Metal Sonic ever in the comics because a lot of them are just kind of comic version of a thing from the game. Again, like how Neo Metal Sonic showed up in the IDW series. Didn't talk about that separately because that's just the same thing. And again, it's more of an upgrade for Metal Sonic than a separate thing. So if I did miss any that are unique, then whoops. I really did try with a lot of them, but there's a bunch and it's easy to lose track. So if I missed any, let me know in the comments below. Like I said earlier, I will probably have to update this with Scrapnik Island if my theorizing with it is correct. We're getting Mecha Knuckles back. We may end up getting some new robot copies introduced. Who knows? The Ruins of the Death Egg are supposed to be involved in some way, apparently, so we might even see Sonic 2 Mecha Sonic back. So, yeah, I might need to update this in the future, so if there were any robots that I missed, let me know, just don't be a dick about it. And if you enjoyed the video, there are a bunch more similar things I would like to do, especially related to Sonic and talking about things outside of the games or the more obscure elements of the franchise. So if you would like to see me do similar videos to this on other topics, like, say, all the versions of the Chaos Emeralds, or every Super Transformation, or every single type of robot that has ever existed in the Sonic series, let me know. And if you enjoyed this video in particular, you can give it a like. That will greatly help me out. You can subscribe and turn the bell notifications on to be notified of when I uploaded new videos, because we know very well at this point that YouTube's sub box is not going to do a great video on it, or a great job of it, rather. Alternatively, you can follow me on Twitter, where I post usually about stupid shit that I am thinking, or just random bits of Sonic trivia that I have just remembered. But as well as when I upload new videos, I always tweet when I upload a new video, so you can check me out over there at VicFant, obviously. And for the final shilling, I have a Patreon where you can donate money to get some special perks, but you by no means have to. If you don't want to, or you can't, that is perfectly okay. Just watching the videos and sharing them around even is more than enough. So it's there if you want to, but you do not need to do it. So I think that is about it, and I will see you guys next time.